Okay, in this video, I'm going to go over the Cardiovascular Webquest and then also tell you a little bit about blood cells before you do the ABO-RH exploration. All right, so you should have read this information, introducing you to the cardiovascular system. Part 1, becoming familiar with the cardiovascular system. So the division of the left and right sides of the heart are important because this keeps the oxygen-rich blood from mixing with the oxygen-poor blood. The purpose of the cardiovascular system, so your heart and blood vessels circulate blood, which obviously has important gases like carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, and oxygen, which is a gas that our tissues need. The purpose of the right atrium, which is the top chamber, and the right ventricle, which is the lower chamber. These two chambers receive oxygen-poor blood and then pump it to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. So the right atrium receives the blood, the right ventricle pumps it through the pulmonary arteries away from the heart. And a little trick between arteries and veins. So arteries starts with the letter A. So arteries go away from the heart, veins go to the heart. So where do the pulmonary arteries lead? They lead to the lungs. The word pulmonary means related to lungs. What is the purpose of the left atrium, which is the top chamber on the left side, and the left ventricle? So the left atrium receives oxygen-rich blood from the lungs, and then the ventricle pumps it through the aorta to the rest of the body. And a little fun fact here, so not all animals have four-chambered hearts. Some animals have three-chambered hearts, for example, frogs. So they have two atria, but they only have one ventricle. So one atria receives the oxygen poor blood, the other receives the oxygen rich, and then they mix in the ventricle. And then one side goes, or one part of the ventricle pumps it to the left side, the other pumps it to the right side of the frog. So a little bit different. Okay, the aorta leads to the body, which is referred to as the systemic loop. The purpose of the valves in the heart are to keep your blood moving in the right direction, so they only open one way once per heartbeat. Systole and diastole. So contraction is systole. This is when the blood is expelled from your heart. Relaxation is diastole, and this is when the heart fills up with blood. The purpose of the coronary arteries, those are the blood vessels over the surface of the heart that supply blood to the heart tissue, that cardiac tissue, cardiac muscle. And then the purpose of your conduction system, we're going to talk more about this next week when we learn how to interpret an EKG. Electrical impulses keep it beating by delivering the signal to the pump. This helps your heart to pump in a normal rhythm. So those lub-dub sounds that you guys feel and hear, those are controlled by your conduction system. All right, part 2, anatomy of the heart. So these are the parts we need to know. So I'm going to edit this so it makes it a little bit bigger. So the external anatomy, if you want to pause here and check your labels with mine. Nothing weird here. So the atria are on the top, ventricles on the bottom. Remember, left and right are switched because it's the patient's left and the patient's right. The vena cava, so you have the superior, which means on top, and inferior portion. And then your aortic arch, this is actually the correct term, is the aortic arch. And this doesn't really show this on this model, but the aortic arch also extends behind the heart. And so these three branches of the aortic arch lead to the head and the trunk, and then you have another component down here which leads to the posterior end of the body. And then the back side of the heart, so you have these blood vessels here which have been cut, so you can see them, the aorta, and then your different components of the aortic arch. So you have I here, which is the brachiocephalic artery, which brachio meaning arm, cephalic meaning head, so these lead to your head and your arm. And then the common carotid artery is the middle one right here. And then this one over here is called the subclavian. We're not going to worry about that one. And this is the backside showing the superior and inferior vena cava. These are your pulmonary veins. Again, vein meaning leading away from the heart. And then F is your pulmonary artery, veins leading to the heart, pulmonary arteries leading away from the heart. All right, and then your internal heart anatomy. Again, if you want to pause right here and check your answers with mine. So the blood comes in through the right atria, right here, and then goes into the right ventricle. This is called your tricuspid valve, tri because it has 3 attachments, as you can see down here. And then this is called the pulmonary semilunar valve. So pulmonary because it's part of the pulmonary circuit, leads to the heart, or excuse me, to the lungs. And semilunar, semi meaning partial, lunar, moon, because they kind of look like little half moons. And then over here we have the right atrium and the right ventricle. Did I switch that? Sorry, I just noticed a mistake. This should say left, not right. So this is the left atria and the left ventricle. And then separating these two cavities, this is the bicuspid valve. So bi because there's 2 attachments down here. These white string things, those are called the chordae tendineae, and they're attached to the base of the heart by the papillary muscles, which are right here. Papillary meaning nipple shaped. All right, and then the last valve here, labeled with L, this is the aortic semilunar valve. Aortic because it leads to the aorta. All right, and the last picture, this is showing the flow of blood through the heart. So blue again is the pulmonary loop. This is deoxygenated blood, and then red is systemic loop, with the oxygen-rich blood. So from the head and the arms, this is the superior vena cava, leads into the right atria, as well as the inferior vena cava. And then this blood goes into the right ventricle, leading through the pulmonary semilunar valve, and then out through the pulmonary arteries. This side goes to the right lung to be oxygenated. This side goes to the left lung. The systemic loop, so these are coming in through the pulmonary veins. This side from the left lung, this side from the right lung, goes into the right atria first, the left atria first, left ventricle, and then out through the aortic semilunar valve to the aorta. And then these lead to different parts of the body. And then again, like I said earlier, there's also a posterior portion of the aorta, which isn't shown here in this model, which goes to the posterior portion of the body. Okay, so those are the answers for the Cardiovascular Webquest. Before you jump into the ABO-RH exploration, I want to go through some important things about the blood cells. So there are a few different functions of blood, obviously delivering oxygen and nutrients to the tissue, but also getting rid of waste products from the cells. For example, carbon dioxide is a waste product that our bodies don't need. But the blood is also responsible for transporting hormones, like we discussed in the previous unit. Also helps us maintain homeostasis by regulating our body temperature. Also maintaining blood pH, carrying different buffers. So if our blood gets too acidic, our body creates a buffer to raise the pH. Also to maintain fluid volume in our body, prevent blood loss, which is part of your platelets, responsible for blood clotting, and then also preventing infection. So your white blood cells, those T cells and B cells that we discussed last unit, those are part of your blood, and then they also carry antibodies, which, as you guys know, has an important response and important part in the immune response. Okay, so 3 types of blood cells. You have white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. I'm not going to assess you over the different types of white blood cells. We just don't have time. But just know that there are a few different types. T cells and B cells, those are specific types of lymphocytes that we discussed last unit. And red blood cells, which we're going to focus a lot on in this unit, they're called biconcave cells because they kind of look like lifesavers without the holes, and then platelets down here, which are different proteins, blood clotting factors, which help to stop your blood from leaving your blood vessels. Very important. Okay, so I'm going to skip this one because we just don't have time to talk about hematocrit tests. But I do want you to know, because some of you guys might have this test done, but they're trying to determine the amount of different cells in your blood. So they'll take a sample of blood, they'll put it in a centrifuge, and they'll spin it down really fast, which separates the blood components by density. And then they can look at your column of blood and determine if you have low red blood cell, white blood cell, and platelet counts. But you guys are going to do an activity later called complete blood cell count lab, which is another way that you can determine if a patient has normal or abnormal amounts of different blood cells. All right, and then this is just showing the different types of white blood cells. Again, I'm not going to go through these because I'm not going to assess these. But if you want to know more, you can pause it right now and read about those types of blood cells. All right, so now you guys are going to complete the blood ABO-RH exploration, and then when you guys are done with that, I will post another video in your private comments going through the answer key for this activity. Good luck.